The snow came in off the Greywood Pass 3 days before I arrived at Fenhold, and by the time I reached the outer gate, it had buried the road to my knee. I did not look like a king. I had planned it that way. My cloak was a common wool one, dark, travel-worn at the hem. My boots were a border guard's old pair, cracked at the left welt, the kind of thing you pick up at a market stall in a town where no one knows your name. I had left my silver wolf clasp with Edrin, my second, along with my seal ring and the fur-lined riding coat that a man of my station wore without thinking. What I carried instead: a short blade, a bone-handled knife, a pack with a few days' provisions, and limping at my left heel with one bloody forepaw wrapped in a strip of my undershirt, my wolf Karak. Karak is not a small wolf. He is the color of iron in winter, and in his proper place, standing at my shoulder in the great yard of Ravenhold while the pack assembled for inspection. He makes grown warriors step back half a pace without meaning to. Here, with his ear laid back and his paw bandaged and his tail tucked against the wind, he looked merely large and unhappy, which suited us both. I had not done this sort of thing in 15 years. When I was 22 and newly come into the kingship after my father died of the wasting sickness, I used to walk the border towns in plain clothes, listening. A young king without his father's memory needs to understand what his kingdom actually feels like from the ground, not from the council table. He needs to know who is generous and who is not, who keeps their word in the cold and the dark, and who pretends to. He needs to know what the settlements think of the tax rotation and the patrol schedules and the allocation of winter supplies. In the honest, unguarded way, they only think it when they believe no one of consequence is in earshot. My father had told me that, in one of the last conversations we had before the fever took him, and I had believed him and acted on it and found it to be exactly true. I was 37 now. I had not done it since Myra died. Myra! The thought of her name still moved through me like a cold current under ice, present, felt the weight of it there, not sharp any more the way it had been in the first 2 years, not the edge that catches when you move too fast, but felt. She had been my Luna for 9 years. She had been a woman of great warmth and considerable stubbornness, and a laugh that was too loud for a queen's hall and that she did not diminish on its account. She died in the 3rd winter of our reign, of a fever that came fast and moved faster, and left no room for anything except the holding of her hand, and the fact that I could not fix it, could not call on strength or silver or 300 years of pack tradition, or any of the things that I could usually, in the ordinary course of a king's life, bring to bear on a problem and expect to make a difference. She died and I went on, because there is no other option for a king, and because the pack needed to see me go on, and because going on is what you do. My council had been suggesting a new mate for 4 years. I had been declining for 4 years. There was no particular cruelty in their suggestion. It was practical. It was dynastic. It was what the old lore required of an alpha king, that he should not sit long without a Luna, that the pack should have the stability of a bonded pair at its head. These were not wrong arguments, but each time they raised it, something in me went flat and quiet and I changed the subject, and eventually the subject got changed, and we arrived over 4 years at a kind of collective agreement not to force it. What had changed in the last month was something I could not explain to my council. I was not sure I could have explained it to anyone. 3 reports had come in from Fenhold, which was a holding of perhaps 200 souls on the northern border, a widows' and veterans settlement, technically under the Ravenhold banner, but so far from my seat that it governed itself through a small council of elders, and I rarely had cause to visit. 3 reports from 3 separate writers across 3 separate weeks, each saying the same thing in different words, that the woman who ran Fenhold's infirmary had become, in the past winter, something of an anchor for the holding, that her name was Sable, no pack name on record. She had arrived 6 years ago from somewhere in the eastern holds and simply stayed when she found they needed a healer. That wounded wolves from the border raids came to her and did not leave after. that the pack's children gathered in her yard in the evenings for reasons that the reports could not fully account for. That old Torvin, the elder who had run Fenhold for 30 years and who was not, by any account I had ever received, a man who deferred to anyone, had twice in the last winter publicly deferred to her judgment in matters he would not previously have ceded to a ranking council member. None of this on its face was my business as Alpha King. Holdings took care of their own. That was the point of them. A good healer was a good healer, and if an elder found someone worth listening to, that was the elder's affair. And yet, my wolf had not slept well in 4 years. I could feel him, in the way that a bonded alpha knows his wolf, not separate, never fully separate, but distinct in the way that a second heartbeat is distinct even when it keeps time with your own. He ran in my chest like something caged, not savage, not destructive, just restless in a way that I could not account for, and that he seemed unable to explain even through the language wolves use, which is mostly motion and posture and the quality of attention. He had been still, in the years with Myra. He had been still in a way that I thought was simply the nature of a mated bond, the wolf at rest because the mate mark was alive and the pack was whole, and I had not thought to question it until she was gone and the stillness went with her, and the restlessness came in its place. 3 nights before I left Ravenhold, Carrick had lifted his head from his paws in our chamber, looked north, and made a sound I had not heard from him since the early days of my bond with Myra, a low, long note that was not quite a howl and not quite a question. He did it once. Then he lay back down and closed his eyes and went asleep, as if the sound had been sufficient, as if it had addressed whatever required addressing, and I lay awake for 2 hours in the dark thinking about it. I left 5 days later, in plain clothes in the snow. Not because I thought I would find anything in Fenhold beyond what the reports had described. I am a practical man, and I do not chase sounds my wolf makes in the dark as though they were prophecy. But the restlessness had been a long time building, and Fenhold needed a proper survey after the border raids anyway, and sometimes a king needs to be somewhere his council is not, where he can think in the ordinary way without the weight of 15 people's opinions pressing against his. I told my second I would be back in a fortnight, and that if I was not, he should send Wren and 4 riders quietly, and that he should not, under any circumstances, send 20 riders and a fanfare, because that would defeat the entire purpose. Edrin gave me a look that communicated, without words, that he found my judgment on this as on several other matters to be of questionable reliability, but that he would do as I asked. The gate at Fenhold was a heavy timber affair, stoutly built, the oak weathered to gray and the iron hinges good quality. A king notices these things. The man on watch was a graybeard with a long spear, and the kind of permanent squint you develop after too many years watching a horizon in winter light. The look of someone who has learned that most of what appears on the horizon in winter is trouble of one kind or another. "Name," he said. "Cale," I said. I had not used that name in 15 years, but it was mine from before my childhood name, the one that my father called me in the years before the weight of the kingship made the short form feel strange, the one that Myra had still used in our private hours, because she said Aldrich sounded like a name for a formal portrait, and she preferred the one that fit in her mouth easily. It felt like putting on an old coat that still fit despite the years, a little surprising that it did. "Where from?" "Ashfern Border Road. We got turned around in the pass 3 days ago." I nodded down at Carrack, who was managing his wounded traveler impression with considerable commitment. My wolf took a stone cut. "I'm looking to shelter until the road clears." The gatekeeper looked at Carrack for a long moment. Carrack sat and looked miserable and held his bandaged paw slightly off the ground, which was genuine. The cut was real, a proper gash from a sharp-edged stone in the frozen past 2 days into the journey, just not as debilitating as I was suggesting. The bandaging was clean. The misery was authentic. "Infirmaries in the east yard," the gatekeeper said. "Long, low building, doors usually open. Ask for Sable." He opened the gate without ceremony and went back to watching his horizon, and I walked into Fenhold with my wolf at my heel, and the snow thick on my shoulders, and no one any the wiser. Fenhold in winter was compact and snowbound, and against all expectation, oddly cheerful. The buildings were timber and stone, older construction, but maintained with evident care. I noted the roof lines, the condition of the fences, the grain store doors properly sealed against damp, the way the paths between buildings were cleared and graveled so the footing was good even in ice. A king notices these things even when he is pretending not to be one. Smoke from a dozen chimneys, the smell of wood fire and baking bread, and something resinous and medical that I did not place until later. The sound of children somewhere in the middle distance, and the clean ring of a hammer in a smithy, and the low, unhurried conversation of people who had settled in for a winter and made their peace with it. I found the east yard without difficulty. The infirmary was exactly as described. A long, low building of good solid timber, 2 shuttered windows facing the yard, and a door that stood slightly ajar despite the cold, not careless, I decided, but deliberate, the kind of open door that tells anyone who needs to come that they can come, that the threshold is not forbidding. There was good heat inside. I could feel it from 3 feet away. I pushed the door open. Inside, warm firelight, the smell of pine resin and dried herbs, that was the resinous smell, closer up, and 4 cots along the left wall. 2 of the cots held sleeping men, border-aid wounded by the look of them, their injuries properly bandaged, each of them with a blanket pulled to the chin and the deep, even sleep of people being well cared for. On the far wall, a long shelf of clay jars and tied herb bundles, organized with a precision I found impressive in a border settlement infirmary. A heavy work table in the center, a pestle and a wooden tray, a small book lying open with notes written in a careful compact hand, a brazier in the corner, 3 stools. And at the fire, kneeling with her back to me, feeding it another piece of wood from the stack beside the hearth, was a woman. She stood when she heard the door, setting the wood in without hurrying, and turned. I had been forming a picture of her from the 3 reports. Someone formidable, I had thought, a woman who commands the deference of a 30-year elder and the trust of veterans who do not give trust easily tends to run to a certain kind of presence, a bearing that announces itself, an authority of feature. She was not that. She was slight, with the sort of figure that looks built for endurance rather than show, dressed in a heavy linen apron over a plain gray dress, her hair the color of autumn bracken pinned back in a loose practical knot, a smear of something from the jar she'd recently handled on the inside of her left wrist. She had a narrow, quiet face, the kind of face that a crowd's eye moves past, nothing that reaches out to hold attention. Dark eyes that were, I noticed almost immediately, not idle. A small straight mouth that was neither welcoming nor unwelcoming in any performed way, just present. She looked at me, then at Karak. The assessment was brief, complete, and entirely unlike what I was accustomed to receiving when people looked at me. "Come in," she said. "Close the door, you're letting the warm out." I came in and closed the door. Karak, who had been trailing behind me with his ears back and his bandaged paw held carefully up, did something I had not anticipated. He walked past me, crossed the room directly to the woman, and sat down at her feet. She looked down at him. Then she looked up at me, and there was a flicker of something in her face, not quite a smile, not surprise exactly, more like the small quiet confirmation of something she hadn't been certain of until this moment. "How long ago?" she said, crouching down to look at the paw. She did not touch it yet. 3 days, I said. "Stone or ice?" "Stone in the pass." She made a small sound, not judgment, just the intake of information. "Sit down," she said. This was addressed to me. "There's a stool by the fire. Put the pack down." I sat. She stayed crouched beside Karak and spoke to him in a low, matter-of-fact way, the way you speak to someone you intend to touch in order to help them, and you want them to know what's coming before it does. I'm going to look at it, she said. I'll go slow, you tell me what's uncomfortable. Karak, who had last winter bitten a ranking warrior of mine, a man he had known for 6 years, for reaching toward his head without sufficient preamble, held perfectly still. She unwound my bandaging with careful fingers, examined the cut. It ran along the outer edge of the pad, not deep but in an awkward position for a walking animal, and she looked at it from 2 angles before she touched the area around it. And then she went to her shelf without hurrying and came back with 2 clay jars and a square of clean cloth and a strip of folded linen. You've been keeping it clean, she said. Not a compliment. An observation, the kind that precedes the next relevant piece of information. I tried, I said. You did well. The concern now is the cold. Cold slows the tissue, makes the repair uneven. He needs to stay off ice for another 5 days at a minimum. She began to work, still talking to Karak at intervals in the same matter-of-fact undertone, and he held still in a way that I had genuinely never seen from him in the presence of a stranger. Karak's tolerance for handling is not generous. With me, yes. With Edrin, who has known him since he was barely out of puppyhood mostly, on a good day. With anyone else, he endures it as a courtesy when he chooses to and does not when he does not. He pressed his nose against her knee briefly, and she acknowledged it without making a fuss of it, a small motion, neither rejection nor performance, and went on working. And you, she said, when she had finished with the paw and was wrapping it with the efficiency of someone who has done this particular task in cold and dark and exhaustion, and has no patience for unnecessary fuss. Are you injured? No. You look like you've been on a cold road for several days, without adequate rest. I have been. There's soup on the fire. One of my patients made it this morning and left considerably more than I can use before it turns. You're welcome to it. She stood, moving to a hook by the door for a clean cloth to wipe her hands. There's a stable around the back. Do you have a horse? No. Only us. She absorbed this without remark, went to the pot that hung over the fire, ladled soup into a bowl without asking a second time whether I wanted it, and set the bowl on the table and pointed at the stool near it. I understood I was being directed. I sat where directed and ate. The soup was good. There were not many moments in the life I led when the simple fact of warm food was striking, but 3 days on a cold road in plain clothes with a wounded wolf, eating from provisions that had run down to the end by the time we reached the pass, had reminded me that I am, whatever else I am, a body that needs feeding. She had seen that before she had seen anything else about me. She had not asked, had not made ceremony of it, had simply fed me. I ate. She moved around the infirmary doing the quiet business of the evening, checking the sleeping men, adjusting one man's blanket where it had slipped, making a note in the small book on the work table. She did not hover. She was not solicitous. She gave me warmth and food, and then went about her work as though I were already something that belonged in the room, a piece of furniture accounted for, and the naturalness of it settled around me the way the warmth did, gradually, until I could not quite say when I had stopped being cold. Karak had gone to sleep on the hearthrug. Where is he sleeping tonight? She said, nodding at him. Wherever I am, usually, I said. You can use the end room. She indicated a door in the back wall, partly hidden by the edge of the supply shelf. It's small, but it's warm. There's a brazier in there, and I keep it going at night. The main hold is full. We had a supply delegation arrive just before the storm, and they took every guest room. She paused. It's a storeroom, but a clean one. The storeroom is fine, I said. Thank you. It's warm, she said, which was her only recommendation of it, and went back to her notes. I had planned to spend 3 days in Fenhold. 3 days to assess the patrol situation, make note of the supply shortfalls from the border raids, check in with the elder, and be back on the road before the next weather came in. I spent 19. The road did not clear. A secondary storm came in 4 days after I arrived, sharper than the first, and added another foot to the pass and made the western approach impassable, but I would not have left even if it had cleared on the second day. I am a king, and I am capable of being honest with myself in private about the reasons I am staying somewhere, even when those reasons are not the ones I was prepared to admit before I arrived. I stayed because I was learning something. Not about Fenhold, though I was learning about that too, the quiet, steady cataloging that I cannot fully turn off running in the background of everything I saw, the state of the fences, the temper of the elder council, the quality of the border raid preparations, the way the supply allotment was being managed, and the ways it was not. I was learning something about the woman who ran the infirmary, and about what she had built here, and I could not quite stop. Her name, the name she gave, was Sable. She had come to Fenhold 6 years before, in the late autumn, arriving on foot with a small pack of provisions, and a knowledge of healing herbs that she said she'd acquired from an old aunt in the eastern holds who had kept a healer's practice. She had found the elder Torvin and asked, straightforwardly, whether there was a need for a healer. There had been. Fenhold's previous healer had died the winter before, and they had not yet found a replacement, and the border raids were leaving wounded, and the winter illnesses were coming, and he had said yes, she could try, and she had stayed, and at some point in the intervening 6 years the trial had become simply the fact of her. I learned this not from her. She was not given to discussing herself, spoke about her own history only in passing references, and never in the form of a story she was telling, but from the settlement itself, which was where you learn things when you are pretending to be nobody. I spent my days in the way a stranded traveler would, quietly, usefully, not intrusively. I carried wood from the stack to the various hearths that needed it. I helped the blacksmith's boy when his horse threw a shoe in the yard, and the boy was in over his head, and too proud to say so. I fixed a section of fence near the eastern gate that had been improperly reinforced the previous season and was showing it. I sat in the common room of the main hold in the evenings, and listened to the conversations that happen in such a place in winter, when there is time and there is warmth, and the people have known one another long enough to speak without careful editing. From these conversations, I assembled a picture of Sable that matched the reports and made them more complicated. She was trusted. Not loved, exactly, or not loved loudly, not in the warm vocal way of someone who cultivates affection deliberately, but trusted in the specific and difficult-to-manufacture way that means people bring her the things they cannot say to anyone else. I learned this from what the people around me didn't say directly but implied in the way they talked about her. The veteran whose wound wasn't healing properly, and who had finally, in December, gone to see her rather than continuing to hide it, and whose relief at being properly treated was palpable even in the telling. The woman whose pregnancy was difficult who came to the infirmary in the evenings rather than the mornings, because her husband didn't need to see her worry, and she trusted Sable to keep what they discussed between them. The children who gathered in her yard in the evenings were there, because she left out bread for the birds and there were always birds, and the children came for the birds, and she let them stay. What she was not, ingratiating. She did not court approval and did not perform warmth. She had the quality, I noticed it on the first evening and kept noticing it across the days, of a woman who had stopped needing the approval of others some time ago, not bitterly, not with a wound behind it, just as a simple settled fact of herself. She said what she meant. She asked what she needed to know. She did not fill silence with words because silence felt uncomfortable. She let silence be silence, which is a thing many people cannot do, and she did without apparent effort. She did not, in those first days, ask me anything about myself that I had not already volunteered. She knew I was a traveler named Kale, that I had come from Ashburn with a wounded wolf, that I was useful with my hands and did not cause trouble. These were, apparently, the relevant facts, and she treated them as such. On the 4th day, Carrick stopped limping. The cut was healing cleanly. She checked it on the 3rd morning, making one adjustment to the wrapping, and pronounced it progressing well. On the fourth afternoon, having been given the all-clear to walk normally, Karak chose not to return to the back room where he'd been sleeping, but instead to station himself under the work table in the main room of the infirmary. He lay there with his chin on his paws and his eyes tracking her as she moved, not demanding anything, simply present. She noticed this and said nothing. She did not encourage him, did not call to him or make a fuss, simply accepted that there was now a large iron-gray wolf under her table and worked around him. After the first day, she stopped noticing him in the noticing way. He had become part of the room's furniture, which he accepted without vanity. I watched this across the days and could not account for it in any way that satisfied me. On the seventh day, the supply delegation caused trouble. I had been expecting some version of this from the start. They were 12 men from the lowland holds, well supplied for the journey, led by a man named Edric who had the specific manner of someone who has spent a career administering to places smaller and less significant than the place he considers himself to be from. He was not a bad man in any dramatic sense. He was the kind of man who becomes unpleasant in the quiet, accumulating way of someone who has decided the world has not arranged itself sufficiently around his importance, and who finds that a winter storm trapping him in a border settlement is further evidence of this failure. On the seventh day, he came to the infirmary. I was in the back room, working on mending a pair of boots that had given me trouble since the first day of the journey. The door was not fully closed. I heard the exchange clearly. Edric came because one of his men had a festering cut on his hand, a real injury, genuinely worse than it had been led on to be, and had finally admitted to it. The trouble was not the wound, which Sable would treat. The trouble was the way Edric spoke to her about it. "You should have caught this days ago," he said, not loud, the particular tone of someone who has decided the room owes them something. "The man has been in and out of this building for a week. Are you not attending to your patients on a regular basis?" "I attend to patients who come to me," she said. Her voice was exactly even. "Your man did not come to me. He should not have had to present himself. You're the settlement healer. It is your function to check for injury." A brief pause. "I'll clean the cut now," she said. "He'll need to keep it wrapped and warm for 5 days and then—" "I'm speaking to you," Edric said. The quality of the pause this time was different, longer by a degree, and the quality of the silence in it was its own kind of answer. "I heard you," she said. "I disagreed with you. I'm treating the wound now." I had set down the boot and risen from the pallet before I decided to. I stood at the door and I held myself still, because I had not kept my cover for 7 days to throw it away over the manners of a supply official. However strongly every trained instinct I had wanted to walk through that door and make clear, in the way an alpha king makes things clear to supply officials, what the correct relationship between Edric and Sable actually was. What stopped me was not only the cover, what stopped me was her. She handled it, completely without drama, without anger. She finished treating the wound with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to everything, and when Edric said something further, his voice low enough that I caught only the shape of it, something to do with her understanding her position, she said, in a tone that was perfectly level and somehow contained the precise totality of her opinion of him, "I know what my position is. I'm not sure you know what yours is." There was a silence after that. Edric left. His man, I heard from the hearthrug where he was now sitting, said quietly, "Thank you." "Keep it dry," she said. "Come back in 2 days." I went back to the pallet and sat with the boot in my hands and stared at the wall for a while. Karak, who had at some point during the exchange come in from the main room and installed himself across the foot of the pallet, looked at me with the expression he uses when he considers my self-discipline to be my problem and not a quality worth protecting. "Don't," I told him. He put his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. On the 9th day, the elder Torvin had a crisis. Torvin was somewhere in his 70s, lean and iron-spined and possessed of the deep specific stubbornness that comes from managing a border settlement for 30 years without either losing it or destroying it. This is a balance that requires a particular kind of intelligence, one that knows when to hold and when to yield, when to defer and when to stand firm, and Torvin had it. He was not an easy man to impress and not a man who impressed easily, and the fact that the 3 reports about Sable had each mentioned, independently, that he had deferred to her was the first thing that had pulled my attention. The crisis was his heart. He had been experiencing what he called a bit of a turn for 2 days before Sable noticed, and he had not told anyone, because Torvin managed illness the way men of his type manage any vulnerability, by refusing to acknowledge it until acknowledgement could no longer be avoided, and sometimes past that point. She found him in the main hall, at the elder's table with his son and 2 members of the settlement council, discussing the spring patrol rotation as though his color were not slightly wrong and his breathing not slightly careful. She appeared in the doorway and said, without any prefatory remarks, "Elder, I need you in the infirmary." "I'm in a meeting," Torvin said. "Your meeting can hold for 15 minutes. She paused. "I would like it to." This was the variant I had come to recognize as her particular form of firmness, the one that looked like a request and felt, when you tested it, like a closed door. Torvin knew her. He had encountered this version of her before, enough times to understand the difference between the suggestion and the instruction. He looked at the council members, looked at his son, looked back at her. He pushed back his chair. "I was in the infirmary when they arrived, having been there all morning helping her rearrange the supply shelves, a task she'd mentioned needing to do and that I had offered to assist with because I had nothing else useful to occupy my hands. When Torvin came in, I sat on the stool in the corner and attempted to take up less space than I do." She told him what she was seeing. She told him what it indicated and what it didn't, what to watch for, what changes to make for the next several weeks, and she told him all of this in the direct, precise way she told people things, without softening it into something easier than it was, without making it harder than it needed to be. He listened, which I could see was not entirely natural for him but which he managed because he respected her. When she finished, he said, "You should have been an elder." She said, "I'm not from here." "You've been here 6 years. A place doesn't claim you just because you've stayed in it." A pause. "Rest, I mean that." After he left, she stood at the supply shelf with her back to me and her hand resting on one of the clay jars. The set of her shoulders had something in it I hadn't seen before, not exhaustion, not quite. The thing that comes after you have been responsible for a great deal for a long time, that surface in a private moment when you think no one is looking. I had learned in 9 days that she did not want that moment addressed directly. What she wanted was for it to pass, and for the next task to be already available when she was ready for it. "The shelf is done," I said. "What else needs doing today?" She turned around. Something moved briefly behind her eyes. "Nothing tonight," she said. "Go and eat something." On the 12th day, one of Edric's men decided I was worth being unpleasant toward. I had maintained the cover carefully, a passing stranger, useful with a hammer, quiet in the evenings, no particular opinions about anything that didn't require them. But I am not a small man, and I am not an easy man to talk past, and one of the delegation's younger members had spent enough evenings in the common room to notice that I was resistant to the particular kind of conversation he preferred. He found me at the stable, where I was brushing one of the delegation horses, because the regular stable hand had come down with a winter chest cold, and the horse needed doing. "Ashfern man," he said. This was how he had taken to referring to me. "What is it you actually do, beyond drifting about?" "Travel," I said. "What else?" "Not much else at present." He leaned against the stable door with his thumbs in his belt and the look of someone who has decided on a specific unpleasantness and is working up to delivering it. You've been very settled for a man just passing through. Good fire, good food, the healer's hospitality." He paused. "The healer's pet, that's what Edric's calling you." I set the brush down. I thought about Carrack, under the table in the infirmary. I thought about the woman named Sable who had, when faced with Edric's condescension, handled it with a calm precision that left him with nothing to do but leave. I thought about what she would do if she heard that phrase, and what I thought she would do was look at this young man the way she looked at things not worth making a fuss over, with a level attention that communicated, without drama, that she found the thing insufficient to require her anger. "Is that so?" I said. "No offense intended," he said, in the way that announces the offense is the point. "Yes, there was," I said pleasantly, "but you're young and cold and stuck, I'll leave it." He left, the irritation of having gotten no fight to show for his trouble on his face, and I went back to the brushing. But I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about what he'd said. Not the insult that moved through me like water off stone, too small to hold. The fact of it being said, that in 12 days, without my doing anything to cause it, I had become associated with her, that the settlement had noticed this, that I had not noticed them noticing it, which was careless, and also that my reaction to noticing it now was not alarm at the compromise of my cover but something quieter and more complicated that I was not entirely ready to examine. On the 13th evening, I finally asked her something real. The patients were asleep, the fire was low and good, Carrack was under the table. She was writing in the small book she kept case notes. I had gathered, patient by patient, treatment and outcome and follow-up, more organized than any infirmary I had seen that was not attached to a hold of 3 times this size. I had been on the stool for some time, not going to the back room the way I was meant to. "How did you end up here?" I said. She kept writing. "I walked from Morro Vale, 11 days. Why Fenhold?" A pause pinned down. "I needed somewhere that needed something I could give," she said, "and I needed somewhere far enough from the eastern holds that no one would know me." This last sentence was said evenly, without inflection, the kind of sentence that sits on top of a great deal it is not saying, and is not intended to invite further excavation. I was good enough at reading people to hear the door in it. "You built something good here," I said. She looked at me. In the firelight her face was legible in ways it sometimes wasn't, the dark eyes not giving much away but not hiding it either. "The settlement built it," she said. "I kept wounds clean." "That's not all you did." "It's most of what I did." She picked up the pen. "It's enough." There was something in that word, in the way she said it, not bitterly, not resignedly, just with the particular plainness of a woman who has decided that enough is a word worth reclaiming from the diminished place it usually occupies. I turned it over in my mind and could not quite find the bottom of it. "Where did you come from?" I said, "before Morro Vale." She was quiet for a moment. "Then somewhere I couldn't stay." I did not push. She had been patient with my presence in her space for 13 days, had given it without being asked and without requiring anything in return, and she had not once asked me anything I hadn't already offered, and I owed her the same in return. But when I stood to go to the back room, I stopped in the doorway. "I'm sorry," I said, "for wherever that was." She looked up. The firelight caught her face. For a moment something that was not pain but was closely related to pain moved through her expression, and she let it, and then she put it back. "Sleep well, Cale," she said. On the 14th morning, Carrack was not in the back room when I woke. I found him in the infirmary, under the table. She was at the shelf, her back to the door. When she heard me, she looked over her shoulder and said without preamble, "He's fine. He's been there since I opened up." "He doesn't do this," I said. "Stay somewhere without me." "He seems comfortable," she said. "I didn't call him." "I know," I stood in the doorway. "Is it a problem?" "He's not in the way." She turned around fully and looked at me with the direct measuring attention she used when she was assessing something she hadn't entirely decided about yet. "Is it a problem for you?" I looked at my wolf, the iron-gray wolf who had stood at my shoulder through 15 years of kingship, through campaigns and council wars, and the long flat grief of the last 4 years, lying under a border settlement healer's work table with his chin on his paws and his tail fully at rest. "No," I said, "it's not a problem." I went to help with the wood carrying and did not think about it for most of the morning, which required a degree of effort I found illuminating. The delegation left on the 15th day. The sky cleared briefly in the afternoon, not enough to guarantee the pass, but enough that Edric decided the risk of another storm with Fenhold's accommodations was worse than the risk of the road, and he gathered his men and his horses and his impatience and departed, which lightened the atmosphere in the settlement by a perceptible amount. Fenhold without the delegation was quieter and more entirely itself. The common room that evening was the regular people, the blacksmith and his wife, the border patrol veterans, the elder's son and his young wife, the women who ran the supply stores. I had become, in 2 weeks, a recognized feature of the room, not quite belonging but not quite outside it either, the kind of trusted stranger that small settlements occasionally adopt on a provisional basis. Torvin was in his chair by the fire, supposedly resting in the modified sense he had negotiated with his own stubbornness, sitting still, at least, rather than going out in the cold. He had been better in the 2 days since Sable had spoken with him. Not recovered, that would be longer, but better. Sable was not in the common room. She was almost never in the common room in the evenings. She stayed in the infirmary until the fire needed banking and the last notes of the day were written. I sat with my cup and did not look at the doorway. Torvin, from his chair by the fire, caught my eye at some point in the middle of the evening. He held it for a moment, expressionless in the way of a man who has spent 30 years reading rooms, and then looked back at the fire. He did not say anything. This was its own kind of comment. Later, walking back to the infirmary to retrieve Karak, I stopped outside the door. I could hear her. She was not talking, there were no patients awake, no conversation. She was humming. It was a low, unself-conscious sound, barely music, just the shape of it, the kind of thing a person does when they are alone and quiet and not thinking about what they are doing. It wound under the cold night air, and I stood on the step longer than I meant to. Then I opened the door. She looked up from the book she was writing in. Karak lifted his head and looked at me with the expression he uses when he has been comfortable and has not finished being comfortable and considers the interruption premature. "Good evening," she said. "Good evening," I said. "I came for the wolf." "He can stay." Then, as if hearing something in her own words, "if you want him to." "He wants to," I said, "which seems to be what determines things." She looked at Karak, then at me. "You can stay too," she said. "I'm only writing, the fire's good." I stayed. I sat on the stool with my back to the fire and listened to the scratch of her pen and the quiet of the building and the muffled sound of snow coming down again outside, and the silence between us changed, across the course of an hour, into the kind of silence that does not need filling, and I thought, here is a thing I had not expected to find in a border settlement. In this winter I had not planned to extend. In this life I had thought I mostly understood. On the 16th day, I told her the wolf's name. It is a small thing. Karak is not a secret. But in 16 days I had not offered it because a wolf's name is something you give deliberately, and I had been deliberate about what I offered. "Karak," I said. We were in the ordinary way of the morning. She was at the work table, I was on the stool, and the name came out in the space between one thing and the next, unannounced. She did not look up. "Is that his name?" "Yes." "It suits him." A pause. "How long have you been bonded?" 15 years, since I was 22. "That's a long time to carry one another." "It is." She finished what she was doing and sat back, and then she looked at her hands for a moment and said, "My name isn't Sable." I looked at her. "It's the name I've been using," she said, "for 6 years, but it isn't the one I was born with." She met my eyes. "My name is Lena. I don't entirely know why I'm telling you." "Perhaps because I told you the wolf's name," I said. Something moved across her face. "Perhaps," she said. She went back to the work. I stayed on the stool and looked at the fire and thought about a woman named Lena who had walked 11 days from Morrow Vale and stopped using her own name somewhere in the process, and built 6 years of something unmistakable under a different one, and was now, for reasons she didn't entirely know, telling me the true one. "Lena," I said. She did not look up, but the line of her shoulders changed, very slightly, in the way of someone hearing their own name after a long time. "Yes," she said. On the 17th day, the snow came back. The pass would be impassable for at least 3 more days. The Border Patrol veteran I asked confirmed it after a dawn assessment. 3 more days, minimum, and then the road north. I went back to the infirmary and found it empty of patients, a rare morning, and sat on the stool with Karak on the hearthrug and the fire going and looked at the room and thought. 3 more days. Then Ravenhold and the council, and the dynastic conversations they had been deferring for 4 years, and the rest of what my life was. And what I was looking at in the room around me was a shelf of clay jars and tied bundles, a work table with a pestle and a book, a fire well kept and 4 cots with clean blankets, and the particular quality of a space that has been made useful and good and inhabited with intention over time by someone who cared about it. She came in an hour later with firewood, set it down and looked at me. "You're still here," she said. "Yes." "The road." 3 days at least." She nodded and went to the shelf. After a moment she said, without turning, "You could stay longer, after it clears, if there was need." "I have somewhere to be," I said. "Everyone does." She turned then and leaned against the shelf, and looked at me with the measuring attention I had first seen on the day I arrived, the one that had gone past my cloak and boots and cover name on that first evening, and which I had suspected for some days did not stop at any particularly comfortable place. "I haven't asked," she said. "I want to be clear that I'm not asking, but you look at things the way a man looks at things when he is used to being responsible for them. The fences, the grain stores, the patrol rotation. You've been noting all of it since the first day." The fire cracked. "What makes you say that?" I said, which was not a denial, and she would hear that it wasn't. "Because I do the same thing," she said. "I notice how people use space, who goes where and how often and what they do when they get there. It's a habit that comes from a specific kind of responsibility." She paused. "I'm not asking what kind. I'm saying that whatever you are outside this place, it's fine here. You were useful. You were decent. That's what matters in a place like this." There was a simplicity in that sentence. You were useful. You were decent. That's what matters, that I did not know how to fully receive, because my life is not usually made of simple sentences, and the ones I hear are usually more complicated by stakes and implications, and the particular weight that everything carries when the person hearing it wears a seal ring. The simplicity of it sat in my chest in a way I was not prepared for. "Thank you," I said. It was inadequate, and she seemed to understand it anyway. On the 18th day, I told her my name. Not the childhood name, not the cover, the one that belonged to what I actually was. We were at the work table, the ordinary middle of an ordinary afternoon. She was grinding something in the pestle. I was sitting on the stool doing nothing useful, which I had stopped apologizing for. The fire was good. Karak was under the table with his chin on his paws. The room had, over 18 days, acquired the quality of a place I was not guarding myself against, not relaxed, exactly, not the oblivion of a man without responsibility, but the ease that comes when you have been somewhere long enough that you can simply be in it. "My name isn't Kale," I said. "It was once. It's what people called me when I was young. It's not what they call me now." She stopped grinding. She did not look up immediately. "What do they call you now?" she said. I was quiet for a moment. "Aldrich," I said. The name came down into the room and settled there. She looked up. I watched her face while she put it together. The name, the way I had catalogued the holding, the quality of the observation she had identified, the wolf who stood the way a bonded king's wolf stands, and I watched for what she would do with it. What I saw was not fear, not calculation, not the rapid restructuring that happens when a person realizes they have been talking to someone of significant rank and begins immediately to recalibrate every word they have said. What I saw was, first, acknowledgement, and then, after a moment, something that was wry and specific and nearly amused. "Alpha King," she said, not a question. "Yes." She looked at the pestle. She set it down. Then she picked it up again and resumed grinding, more slowly at first than normally. "I thought perhaps a ranking elder from one of the secondary holds," she said. "Not the king himself." A pause. "Were you testing us?" "No," I said. "I needed somewhere to be that wasn't Ravenhold for a while." She considered this for a moment. "And was it useful?" "Very," I said, "more than I expected." She was quiet. "Then, what happens now?" "I go back. People are waiting." I paused. "The holding, the patrol equipment shortage, the east wall water damage, the fact that the supply allocation has been wrong for 3 years, I'll address all of it, from Ravenhold." "Torvin will be glad of the equipment," she said. "He's been managing without the proper cold weather armor for 2 winters." "I know," I said. "I should have known sooner. That's on me." She looked at me. I had not said that kind of thing in her presence before, the plain admission of a failure of oversight. And I was not sure why I had said it now, except that it was true, and the room felt like a place where true things could be said simply. "You couldn't have known from Ravenhold," she said. "I could have made sure someone told me." She looked at the jar in her hands. "That's a hard kind of responsibility," she said, "knowing the things no one thinks to tell you." "It is," I said. "You know something about it." Something shifted in her face. "A smaller version," she said. I looked at her. This woman named Lena, who had built 6 years of something real in a place that did not know her name, who understood responsibility as a practice and not a performance, who had looked at me for 18 days and waited for me to be what I was without requiring me to admit it on her schedule. And I said the thing I had been not saying since the day she told me her name. "I would like to come back," I said, "when the road clears, as myself." She was still for a moment. "As the Alpha King," she said. "As Aldrich," I said. "The Alpha King comes when the holding requires him. Aldrich would come because he wanted to." She looked at the wolf under her table, then out the window at the slowing snow, then back at the pestle in her hands. "I've been here for 6 years," she said, "and no one has come back for me." "I know," I said. "I'm asking anyway." "Why?" I thought about the wolf who had made a sound in the night and looked north. I thought about 3 reports from 3 separate riders. I thought about 18 days of learning what it felt like to be in a room that was not arranged around my position in it, and what that had reminded me of, and what I had not felt since Myra, and what I was careful not to name too largely to a woman who had asked a plain question and deserved a plain answer. Because this is the first place I've been in 4 years where I remembered what it felt like to simply be in a place, I said. And I believe that is because of you, more than the place. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I heard everything in the silence, the fire, the distant sound of the settlement, the wind gone quiet outside. Then she said, "You'd have to come as yourself, not a traveler, not a cover." "I know. And I'm not going to manage how I speak to you based on what you are." "I hope you won't," I said. "That's the reason for coming as myself." Something at the corner of her mouth. "You're very certain," she said. "In most things," I said, "not in this." She looked at me, then at the work table, then at the wolf who had his chin on her foot. "Come in the spring," she said, "when the road holds as yourself." "I will," I said. "I'm not making promises about what that means," she said. "I'm saying you may come." "I understand." She nodded once, as if something had been logged and properly noted, and went back to her grinding. Karek under the table did not move except to close his eyes. I left the next morning. The road was passable. The border veterans had cleared the first mile of the pass at dawn, and the sky was holding. I rose before light and packed the back room and put on the cracked boots and the plain cloak for the last time and stood in the room for a moment in the dark. Karek was not in the room. I found him in the infirmary, at her side, not under the table, at her actual side, standing. She was at the fire already, the way she always was at that hour, because there was always something to do in the early morning and she did not sleep past it. When I came in, she looked up, and her face had the quality I had learned to recognize as its undistorted form. The face before the day had put anything on it yet. "You're going," she said. "Yes." She looked at the wolf. He looked up at her. She put her hand on his head for a moment, the same matter-of-fact motion she'd used since the first night, neither performing affection nor withholding it, and then she stood straight. "The pass will be slick for the first 3 miles, she said. "The veterans cleared it, but the temperature is still wrong. Go slowly on the descent." "I will." She went to the shelf. She came back with a small cloth packet tied with cord. "For the paw," she said, "if the cold bothers it on the road. The instructions for reapplication are inside." I took it. Our hands were close for a moment, not quite touching, and then the moment had passed and we were where we always were, at a particular kind of arm's length that was not distance so much as care. "Lena," I said. She met my eyes. "Spring," I said. "Spring," she said. I went out into the gray pre-dawn and the cold air, and Karek came with me, walking easily on the heeled paw, and we made for the gate. When I reached it, I looked back. She was in the doorway of the infirmary, standing still, watching us go. She did not wave, which was entirely her, just watching, clear and steady in the early light. I lifted my hand once. She made some small acknowledgement, a slight movement I could not have named, and then I turned north. Karek walked beside me. He was not limping. He moved with the even, unhurried pace of a wolf who knows where he is going and is content about it. And the restlessness that I had carried in my chest for 4 years was, for the first time I could point to, simply not there. I thought for a long time, walking north through the Graywood Pass, about what I was going to say to my council, about what it meant to go back as myself, in proper clothes, with the seal ring, as the Alpha King of Ravenhold, to a border holding, to visit a woman who ran the infirmary and had looked at me for 19 days and waited for me to say what I was when I was ready. About whether it was too fast and whether she would want it, and whether the weight of what I was would change what she had given me so naturally, which was a room that did not arrange itself around my position in it. I thought about the way she said spring. She said it the way she said everything, level, certain, with no performance around it, no softening into what I might want to hear. She meant it. I had spent 19 days learning to read the difference between what she said and what was only social, and she did not have a large category of things that were only social. Spring meant she would be there, and she would not be alarmed by my arrival, and she would look at me with the same clear measuring directness she had used on the first night, and decide what she thought of what she found. That, I thought, was sufficient. The spring came late. The northern passes held snow until nearly the 5th month, which was later than usual, and which my council considered a hardship, and which I considered, privately, a delay that I was not resigned to. I managed the delay by doing the work of 4 years' worth of catching up on what Fenhold and the other border holdings had not had properly attended to: the patrol equipment, the supply allocations, the infrastructure repairs that had been deferred through a combination of distance and insufficient oversight. I sent the orders. I followed up on the orders. I sent a trained healer to winter in Fenhold, which was the first of the things I had said I would do and the easiest to do from Ravenhold without going myself. My counsel, who had learned to read me over 15 years, noted that I was attending very specifically to the northern border settlements this season. Edrin, my second, did not note anything out loud, which was his form of commentary. I rode south with 2 men when the road finally held Edrin and one other, and I went in my proper clothes and without pretense. The border settlements I passed through acknowledged me as I passed, and I let them, which is the difference between being a king and playing at not being one, and which felt, after 19 winter days of the other, like putting on the coat that actually fit. When I arrived at Fenhold's gate, the gatekeeper who opened it was the same graybeard as Winter. He recognized me before I said anything, not by the seal ring, I think, but by Karak, who does look somewhat different from a merely large wolf when he is not performing misery. The gatekeeper opened the gate and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of recognition. The east yard was bright in spring light, the snow gone, the paths visible again, the whole settlement looking like the version of itself that had merely been underneath the winter all along. The infirmary door stood open. I went to the door. She was at the table, and across from her was a woman of perhaps 30 with a small child on her lap, and the particular tight quality of a mother who has been worried for several days and has only now said so. Lena was listening. She was doing the thing she did, the complete, unperforming attention that made the person in front of her the only thing in the room, and she had not yet looked up. Karak, beside me in the doorway, made a sound. She looked up. Something happened in her face, not the professional assessment she gave new arrivals. Something that came before that, quick and warm and immediately composed again, but there for a moment, real and unguarded and entirely hers. "Give me a moment," she said to the woman across from her, who nodded, and Lena came to the doorway. Spring light on both of us, the wolf between us, and she was looking at me in the way she always had, clear-eyed, direct, the complete attention that gave nothing away and somehow gave everything. And I was not in plain clothes, and I was not a traveler, and I was not pretending to be anything other than what I was. "You came," she said. "I said I would," I said. "I know," a pause, "you brought Edrin. And one other, there at the gate." "That's not very kingly," she said. It wasn't criticism. There was something in the line of it, a quality I had not heard from her in winter, something that was almost warmth made audible. "I was told this place doesn't require much ceremony," I said. "Whoever told you that was right." She looked at Karak, who had been patient all winter and was done being patient. She put her hand on his head, then she looked up at me. "Come in," she said. "I have one more patient, then we'll talk." "Take your time," I said. "I always do," she said, which was true. She went back to the woman with the child. I sat on the stool by the fire, my stool, I thought, with a private amusement, and Karak settled across my feet, and the spring sounds of Fenhold went on around us, and I waited with the patience of a man who has learned, in 19 winter days and a long spring of preparation, that her pace is the right one. We talked for the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. Not about what the spring meant or what could come of it, not yet. We talked about Torvin, who had followed the regimen better than she had predicted, not perfectly, but better. We talked about the trained healer I had sent, a young woman from the holding at Ashford who had, Lena told me with the particular neutral tone she used for unexpected good news, been excellent, and who had taught the 3 children she'd identified as having an aptitude more in one winter than she could have given them in 2 years alone. "That's done then," I said. "Nearly," she looked at me. "She's agreed to come back next winter. I think she'd come permanently if the terms were right." "Name the terms," I said. She told me they were reasonable. I said I would arrange them. You've been busy, she said after a moment. I told you I would address the holding's needs, I said. You said the patrol equipment. You didn't say the healer and the supply allocation, and the gate repair and the east wall drainage. I thought ahead, I said. She was quiet for a moment with the expression she had when something had surprised her more than she intended. You thought ahead, she said. I tend to, I said. It's a habit of the work. She looked at Karak, who was on the floor between us, and then at the fire and then at me. You really did come back as yourself, she said, not an accusation, something lower and more private than that. I told you I would. You told me many things, she said. In winter, I wasn't certain how much weight to put on all of them. All of it, I said. I don't say things I don't mean. The fire settled. Outside, the spring evening was beginning to go amber. I don't know what this is, she said. I want to be honest about that. I don't know what I want it to be. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to know. Then what are you asking? Permission to come back, I said. Again, regularly, as myself for the reasons I said. The holding and you, which are both true at the same time. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at her hands. You can come back, she said. This summer if the road holds. I'll come in the summer, I said. I'm still not making promises about what that means, she said. I know, I said, Lena. She looked at me. The fire was warm and the evening was gold outside, and the almost smile that I had spent 19 winter days learning was real and entirely specific came onto her face. Not a full smile. Something less announced than that, but no less true. I came in the summer and in the autumn and in the winter that followed. The summer visit was 2 days. I had council responsibilities that couldn't wait longer, and she had patience, and the second room to finish, and 3 apprentices to supervise, and we talked in the evenings over the fire, and I went back to Ravenhold with more to think about than I had had in a long time. The autumn visit was 5 days. The winter visit was planned and announced, with a proper escort, and the settlement making what small ceremony it could of the occasion, which Lena bore with the patient precision of someone who finds ceremony unnecessary and is prepared to tolerate it on practical grounds. In the evenings of those visits, across the autumn and winter and the spring that came after, things changed in the way things change between 2 careful people who allow it. Slowly, and then not slowly, and then in a way that was neither slow nor fast but simply the right rate. She told me about where she had come from. Not all at once. She was not a woman who gave things all at once. Over visits in pieces, in the matter-of-fact way she talked about case histories. The Eastern holds her father's pack. A betrothal at 22, arranged by her father to a man of his choosing who had, when she arrived, decided she was not what he wanted and said so publicly, and with considerable finality. Her father's pack had not stood for her against the betrothal's dissolution, because the alliance the betrothal represented was more valuable to her father than she was. She had not gone to pieces. She had been angry, she said this directly, without apology, and then she had been practical, and then she had left. Morrow Vale, then the long walk, then Fenhold, then 6 years of Sable instead of Lena. She told me this in the autumn, at the work table looking at her hands. I don't want pity, she said. I'm telling you because you'll find out eventually, and I prefer to tell you directly. I know, I said. Thank you for telling me directly. My father's pack is Tollenfold Banner, she said. I knew the name. The elder at Tollenfold was a man I had met at border councils, smooth, politically practiced, the kind of man who manages other people's loyalty through obligation. I thought about that man, and about a young woman of 22 who had walked 11 days north to be somewhere he would not find her. I thought about what I could do about it, which was not nothing. Shall I address anything about Tollenfold? I said. Formally, there are things I could. No, she said, quick and then more settled. No, it's done. 6 years ago is done. All right. I don't want to be rescued from 6 years ago, she said. I did that myself. What I want, she paused. What do you want? I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the autumn wind came off the gray wood and the fire moved. I want someone to look at where I am, she said. Not where I came from, not what happened, here, this. She moved one hand to indicate the room, the shelves, the records, the sound of the settlement outside the window. I built this, it's mine. I want someone to see it. I see it, I said. She looked at me. I met her eyes and I meant it, not as reassurance, not as the kind of thing a person says to make another person feel better. I had seen this place in plain clothes with a cover name, and no stake in telling her anything she wanted to hear. And what I had seen was a woman who had taken the worst kind of beginning and made something unmistakable from it. I know, she said after a moment, and she believed me. The mate mark came in the deep of the second winter. Not as a ceremony, not as anything formally arranged. We were in the infirmary late, Carrick asleep with his head in her lap, the fire good and the settlement quiet. I had been watching her for a while without saying anything, which was something I had learned I could do without it requiring explanation, and I had said, I want to ask you something. She looked up. Not what you want this to be, I said. I know you don't know that yet. What you think it is. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the fire shifted and the wolf breathed slow, and the snowfall that had started outside was audible as a kind of quietness. I think, she said finally, with the precision she brought to things she had considered carefully, that I have been waiting for something I had decided I didn't believe in anymore. What kind of thing? A person who looks at you and doesn't immediately determine what you're for. She paused. You did that, from the beginning, in plain clothes or otherwise. You looked at this. She moved her hand again, the gesture I had come to know, indicating everything around her, at what I'd actually done. I said, I am. I know, a pause. I didn't expect that. I'd stopped expecting it. She looked down at Carrick, sleeping. I'm not going to tell you what I want this to be. I've been wrong about what I wanted before, but I think I would like to stop stopping it. It was not a romantic declaration. She was not, in the ordinary run of things, a woman who made romantic declarations, and she did not begin to become one for my benefit, and what she gave me instead was what she had, the precise and undecorated truth of it, and it was more than I had been hoping for. That's enough, I said. I know, she said. The mark came in the small hours. I was awake by the fire, Carrick at my feet, Lena asleep in the chair across from me with a blanket over her shoulders the way she sometimes fell asleep when the day had been long and the fire was good enough. It came as a warmth spreading from my left wrist, steady and expanding, not the sudden blazing recognition I had felt with Myra. Myra had been young and bright, and the certainty of her had arrived like sunlight breaking through a long room. This was different. This was the warmth of something that had been present for months, quietly, and was now only acknowledging itself. The way a river fills, not all at once but steadily, until you look and notice that it is full. I looked at my wrist. The mark was there, quiet and certain. She woke. I had not moved, had not made a sound, but she woke the way the body wakes when something shifts in its understanding of itself, and she looked at her own wrist and was still. There it is, she said, calm, almost wondering, as if she had been half expecting it to show up when it was ready. There it is, I said. Carrick by the fire did not lift his head. He was already asleep. He had known, I suspected, for some time. She came to Ravenhold in the spring. There was no question of it being otherwise. Once the mark was on both wrists and the bond had settled in the way a bond settles, quietly, without drama, like a door that opens the rest of the way. There would be ceremony, she said, when the time came. She would not refuse the formal rite, understood what it meant for the pack. But the formal rite was not the real thing, and she would do it in her own time. She came with 2 trunks of her own packing, medicines, records, the small book she had kept for 6 years, and Torvin's son drove her because she had asked him to, not wanting a king's escort for a journey she considered to be simply a woman moving to the next place. The pack assembled in the great yard, as packs will. The senior wolves, the elders, the warriors, the whole assembled weight of Ravenhold's 230 souls who had known me as their king for 15 years, and were now looking at the woman I had found in a border settlement in a winter I had not planned to stay in. She walked into the yard and looked at them. She did not look like a Luna. She was in her own clothes, the good gray dress she wore for formal occasions, which was essentially the same as her ordinary dress but without the apron, her hair properly pinned, her face carrying the particular quality of a woman who has come through hard things and knows that this is a hard thing she chose. She was not performing composure. She simply had it. She looked at the pack, they looked at her. Then old Bren, my most senior councilman, 72 years old, possessed of a stubbornness and an intelligence that had served 4 alpha kings, and that I respected more than most things, stepped forward from the assembled group. He looked at her for a long moment. He was reading her the way he reads everything he considers important, without hurry, without assumption. Then he bowed his head. Not the elaborate formal bow of ceremony. Simply, the bow of a man who has seen something true and acknowledges it. The pack, reading him the way a pack reads its most senior elder, did the same. She received this standing straight and still, not growing large with it, not diminishing it, simply receiving it with the same quality she received everything as information, acknowledged and accounted for. She looked at me. The thing in her face was not triumph. It was not even vindication, though vindication was there somewhere in the background of it, in the long years behind her. What it was, the particular piece of a person who has been somewhere long enough that leaving begins to feel like arriving somewhere new. I went to her. The mark on my wrist was warm. Her hand came up and the mark on hers answered it. The same warmth, the same certainty, the same stillness I had not felt in 4 years. "Well," she said, so only I could hear it. "Well," I said. Carrick pressed against her side. She put her hand in his fur and left it, and he stood straight and proud in the way of a wolf who has been right about something from the beginning and has been patient about being right. She took over the infirmary in the north wing of Ravenhold, not because she was asked to, but because the holding needed a healer of her caliber, and she was not the kind of person who was present without being useful. She brought the 2 apprentices from Fenhold, whom she had already arranged to come before she had arranged for herself to come, because that was how she organized things. She kept records with the same meticulous care. She still rose before the rest of the hold. Carrick slept in the chamber now. He had stopped being restless. I had grown so accustomed to his restlessness over 4 years that its absence was, itself, something to notice, not empty, not the particular quiet of loss that I knew from the years after Myra. A different quiet, the quiet of something returned to. She asked me, one evening some months later, whether I had gone to Fenhold for her, whether those 3 reports had been about her specifically, whether the disguise had been a test of what she was. I told her the truth. "I went because Carrick made a sound in the night and looked north," I said, "and because I needed somewhere to be that wasn't the king's chair for a while, and because 3 reports arrived about a healer in a border settlement and I could not explain to myself or anyone else why I kept returning to them." She was looking at her wrist, and, she said, "And when I arrived," I said, "you gave my wolf your fire and your floor and your care, and you fed a cold traveler without making ceremony of it, and I could not leave." She was quiet for a moment. "I gave your wolf bandaging and a rug," she said. "That's not the same as giving him my fire." "It is," I said. "To the right, wolf." She looked at Carrick, who was on the floor between us, and the warmth that was the foundation of everything she was. The warmth she did not always let show, but which was the reason the children came, and the wolves lay down, and Torvin deferred to her, and veterans told her what they told no one else. That warmth was fully present in her face, and she let it be. "I like the wolf," she said. "I know," I said. "I was jealous." She looked at me. Then she laughed, the sound I had heard for the first time the day of her arrival, short and unannounced and entirely genuine, the laugh that was too real to perform. I thought about my father's advice, about walking the ground to understand what your kingdom felt like from the inside. He had been talking about fences and grain stores, and the temper of border settlements in winter. He had not been talking about this. But the best wisdom, I thought, tends to arrive at more doors than the one it was built for. I looked at my wolf, I looked at her. Everything that had been restless was still. There is no map for this kind of finding. It does not announce itself. It does not come with proclamation or the assembled weight of ceremony that usually surrounds a king's significant moments. It comes through a gate in the snow, with a wounded wolf in a plain wool cloak, and it sits on a stool by a fire that someone else has built and tended, and it eats soup it was not asked about, and it stays. And if you are both patient, if you are both the kind of patient that is also a kind of trust, it stops leaving. She was here. Karak was still. The mark on my wrist was warm and constant, the way it had been every morning since, the way I had forgotten a thing could be. And Ravenhold, in the spring of that year, felt like itself in the way a large and well-run hold feels when it has been missing something it did not know how to name, until the thing arrives and the name becomes simple. It felt like a place where two people were choosing to be every morning because they knew what they had. And that, I had learned quietly, over a winter in plain clothes in a border settlement I had not planned to extend, is what home is. In the days between the delegation's departure and the 17th day, Fenhold opened to me in the way that places open to a person who has been still in them long enough, not with any particular ceremony, but simply because the walls stopped having the texture of walls and became the texture of somewhere familiar. I worked alongside the settlement's people in the ordinary way of a man who is present and useful and not in a hurry. The blacksmith, whose name was Vorn, was a broad-shouldered Ashburn man of 50 who had come to Fenhold after a border raid wound retired him from active patrol, and who had built a good smithy from the ruins of a lesser one. He did not know what I was and did not ask. He knew I was handy with the bellows and that I understood the difference between a properly tempered blade and one that only looks like one, which earned me enough of his regard that he began to speak around me in the way craftsmen speak when they are not performing for an audience. I listened to him the way I had listened to craftsmen in border towns when I was 22, which is to say, carefully, and to the things he was not saying as much as the things he was. What he was not saying, in the aggregate, was this: that Fenhold was a good place held together by inadequate resources and the sheer competence of a handful of people, and that the inadequate resources were not a permanent condition, but a failure of attention from above, from Ravenhold, that is, from me, and that the handful of people doing the holding together included, more than anyone else, the woman in the East Yard infirmary. 6 years, Vorn said to me one afternoon, not quite at me, the way people say things to the room when they have been sitting with a thought long enough that it needs air. 6 years she's been here, and I've seen healers come and go in a dozen settlements, good ones and bad ones, and there's a thing some of them have that most don't. He paused to turn a piece of iron. It's not the knowledge. You can learn the knowledge. It's the way they look at a hurt thing, like it matters the thing itself, not just the treatment of it, like it's the thing they came for. I said nothing. I kept my eyes on the fire. She came for the work, Vorn said. Not for us, but she stayed for us, which is a different thing. He did not say more. He did not need to. I carried that sentence for 3 days before I understood all of what it was describing. On the 10th day, there was a crisis with a border patrol wolf. A patrol team came back in the late afternoon, 4 men, one with a wrist badly wrenched, 2 of the wolves with cuts from the rocky terrain above the pass, and the 4th man came in leading a large brown wolf who was breathing in a way I recognized from campaigns. The careful, measured breathing of an animal that has taken internal damage and is not yet certain of its extent. I was in the yard when they came in. I went to hold the wolf's head, not because I had any healer's knowledge, which I do not, but because Carrick came up beside me, and the brown wolf's distress decreased measurably when Carrick was present, and I was attached to Carrick, and therefore a useful extension of him. Sable appeared from the infirmary 3 minutes after the patrol arrived. She had a way of knowing when to appear. She took over the situation with the particular authority of someone who does not require anyone's permission to be in charge of their expertise. She worked on the brown wolf for the better part of an hour, speaking quietly throughout, to the wolf, to the patrol men, occasionally to me in the holding the head capacity I had assumed and had not been relieved of. I learned things during that hour that I would not have learned from any report. The wolf's name was Selm, and he was 7 years old, and the patrol man who had led him in was the man who had been with him since Selm's first patrol season, and the fear on that man's face was not the fear of a soldier losing an asset, but the fear of someone who loves something and is watching it struggle. She saw that. She addressed it by including him, not falsely, not to manage his feelings, but in the practical sense of giving him specific things to hold and specific things to watch for. His breathing should even out in the next 20 minutes, she told the man, whose name was Davin. If it doesn't, come get me immediately. If it does, that's the interior bruising stabilizing, which is what we want. She paused. He'll be all right, Davin. The damage is recoverable. Davin nodded. He was middle 40s, the kind of solid that comes from decades of hard weather, and he had the particular controlled quality of a man who will not cry in front of witnesses, but needs a moment before he can be entirely sure he won't. She gave him the moment, which she did by continuing to work without looking at him, which gave him something to watch and no audience for anything else. I watched all of this and thought, this is what the reports were trying to describe. This specific thing here. The thing you cannot render adequately in a written account, which is the quality of attention a person brings to the thing in front of them, and what that quality does to the thing, and to everyone who witnesses it. Selm's breathing evened. Davin went back into the yard. Sable cleaned up and started a second pot of soup because the patrol had come in cold and hungry, and there was no one else to think of it, and I carried the wood to feed the fire without being asked, and that was the 10th day. On the 11th day, she showed me the records. Not deliberately, not as a presentation. I was near the work table when she opened the large bound book, the full case record, not the small notebook she carried for daily notes, and I was close enough to see the scope of it. 6 years. Every patient, every date, presenting condition, treatment, follow-up, outcome. In the same careful compact hand, organized chronologically and also by cross-reference, a small mark in the margin pointing to related entries, a notation system on the back pages tracking recurring conditions by season. I had been in infirmaries serving 3 times Fenhold's population that were not kept this rigorously. 6 years of this, I said, without planning to say it aloud. She looked up. People deserve to be remembered accurately, she said. Not a sentimental statement, a practical one in the way she made practical statements that had larger implications than they first appeared to. People deserve to be remembered accurately. The records were not bureaucratic habit, they were a form of fidelity. I turned this over in my mind. I thought about the reports that had reached me from Fenhold, adequate, administrative, accurate in the facts and empty of the texture. I thought about what they had not been able to convey, which was everything in this room and everything in those 6 years of entries. Selm and Davin, the bread left out for birds, the veteran who finally came in December, the seamstress who came at night rather than the day. And I thought about my own holdings records at Ravenhold, which were accurate and organized, and were not, in the way this book was, a fidelity to the people they described. "Can I look at the border raid injury patterns?" I said. "The last 3 years." She looked at me for a moment, then she turned the book toward me. I read for an hour. The patterns showed several things I had not known. A specific type of wound clustering in the spring patrols that indicated a change in the terrain, or the raiding approach that my patrol commanders had not flagged to me. A consistent shortage of a particular dressing material, suggesting the supply allocation was wrong for the volume of injury Fenhold was actually seeing. And a pattern of delayed treatment that was costing people significantly more recovery time than necessary, which she had noted in her blunt, precise way. Delayed 3 days due to shortage of proper materials. Outcome poorer than it needed to be. "I need copies of this," I said. "I'll have them ready before you leave," she said. She did not ask why. She understood why, with the particular understanding of someone who has been noting the problem for 3 years and has been waiting, with the patient precision she brought to everything, for someone who could address it to pay attention. I sat with that for a while. The unperformed quality of her competence, not angled toward any audience, not arranged to impress, simply present and real and doing what it did, was the thing that had made Torvin defer to her, and the veterans trust her, and the settlement make itself around her over 6 years. Not deference to her personality. Deference to what she actually knew, earned over years of paying attention and keeping good records and doing the work whether anyone was watching or not. On the evening of the 15th day, the elder son Perrin sat down near me in the common room. Perrin was 32, careful and intelligent in the way of a man who has grown up watching a patient elder and is learning the skill. He had been watching me across the fortnight with the particular attention of someone who has a question he hasn't yet decided to ask. "You're good with people," he said, not a compliment, an observation carrying a question. "I've had practice," I said. "What kind of practice?" "Various kinds." I looked at him. "What's on your mind?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sable," he said, "she doesn't usually let people stay." "I didn't arrange to stay," I said. "The road stayed." "You could have found other lodging, left the wolf to be seen to and found your own space." He looked at the fire. "She doesn't usually let people get close enough to know her name, the real one." I looked at him. "She told me 2 years ago," he said. "I haven't said it to anyone." "I don't think she's told anyone else before you." I was quiet. "She's been good for this settlement," he said, not quite to me, the way people say the things they have been sitting with long enough that they need to be said aloud even without a specific audience. "Better than we knew how to ask for, and we want her to stay, whatever happens." He looked at me then. "Whatever you are." There it was, the second person in as many days seeing the edges of the cover. A cover works on people who are not paying close attention. The people who pay close attention find the edges. "She won't go," I said. "Not because of anything I do or don't do. This place is hers. She made it so." "Yes," he said, "she did." We sat with that. "She deserves better resources than she's been given," I said. "Yes," he said again, and then, "Is that something that can be fixed?" "Yes," I said. He nodded. He did not ask more. We went back to our cups, and neither of us named the thing that had just been said between us, and both of us understood what had been said. On the 18th evening, after I had told her my name, and she had received it with the dry acknowledgement that told me she had been expecting something not entirely unlike it, we sat for a long time after the conversation settled. The fire was good. Karak was under the table. She had gone back to her grinding, because there was work to do, and she was not the kind of person who let significant conversations derail ordinary work. But the quality of the room had changed in the way rooms change, when something large has been said in them, and not undone. After a while she said, without looking up, "What was she like?" I looked at her. "The Luna," she said. "The one who died." She kept grinding. "You don't have to say." I don't mind, I said. I thought about how to answer honestly. Myra had been many things, and the honest answer was not a summary. She laughed too loud for a queen's hall, I said. She thought this was funny, and it was. She was better than I was at the specific politics of getting older men to listen to a young woman without realizing they were doing it. She had no patience for people who were deliberately stupid, which is different from honestly confused, and she could tell the difference at distance. I paused. She died fast. The fever came quickly, and there was no time to prepare. She was there, and then she was not, and the place where she had been was very specific, and I did not know how to fill it. Lena was still. I'm not trying to fill it, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not looking for the same thing. What I had was itself, and it's gone, and I know that. I looked at the fire. What I didn't know until I came here was that there could be something else. Not the same. Different. Its own thing. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't expect you to say that so plainly, she said. Which part? When most people talk about someone who died, they either can't speak at all or they say too much. And both of those things are mostly about them rather than about the person they're describing. You said what was true about her. It's what she deserved, I said. She looked at me for a moment longer than was ordinary. Yes, she said, that's exactly what I mean. She went back to her grinding. I stayed on my stool. The fire burned down slowly, and Carrick slept, and the snow outside had the stillness that only comes to a winter night when everything has finally, fully settled. The morning I left, I stopped in the main hold to speak with Torvin. He was at his table with his morning tea, and he looked up when I came in, and he knew. He had known, I suspected, since roughly the third day, with the shrewd intelligence of a man who has run a border settlement for 30 years and has learned to read whatever arrives at his gate. He had chosen, with the practical wisdom that had kept Fenhold intact for 3 decades, not to make anything of it until something required making of it. Torvin, I said. My Lord Alpha, he said. No ceremony in the words, just the acknowledgement, simple and direct. No ceremony necessary, I said. You've been running this holding well with what you were given. You should have been given more. I'll correct that. He looked at his cup. The patrol armor, he said. And the supply allocation, the east wall drainage, several other things the records make clear, I paused, and the infirmary. He was quiet. Whatever it needs, I said. Whatever she needs to do the work properly. Torvin looked out the window at the east yard. She never complained, he said. That's her way. She sees what wants doing and does it and doesn't build a case for why she deserves more, which means people at a distance assume she doesn't need it. I should have looked more carefully years ago, I said. You couldn't have known from Ravenhold, he said, not unless someone told you. I should have made sure someone was telling me. He looked at me steadily. Then you'll come back. In spring, I said. He nodded slowly. She said she'll stay, he said. Whatever happens, this is her place now. He met my eyes. Whatever you come back as, whatever comes of it, it's her decision. Not ours to arrange. I know, I said. He studied me for a moment with the particular attention of a man whose judgment I had come to respect across 15 days of watching him. Then he said, with the dry precision that was his form of warmth, she told Perrin her name. 2 years she's been here without telling anyone, and she told Perrin, and now you. I know, I said. He said. I left him to his tea and went back through the east yard and found her in the infirmary, already working in the early light, with Carrick at her side. There is a particular texture to the days in a place where you are neither fully a visitor nor fully a resident, and I had come to know that texture by the end of the first week. I moved through Fenhold in the way that water moves through a channel it has found, following the shape of what was there, taking up the space that was offered, not forcing anything. The children noticed me first, because children notice what their parents do not. There were 7 or 8 of them who came to the infirmary yard in the evenings for the birds and the warmth, and whatever quality it was that drew them there. And they had been wary of me, initially with the wariness of settlement children around an unknown adult. And then they had not been, because I did not try to be interesting to them, and I did not attempt to win them. And what they found in the absence of those attempts was that I was simply present and not a problem. One of them, a girl of perhaps 8, quiet and observant, who I had noticed watched Sable the way an apprentice watches a master she has not yet formally declared herself to, came and sat near me one afternoon while I was mending the east fence. She watched me work for a while without speaking, which I respected. Then she said, "Do you know about wounds?" "A little," I said, "from campaigns." "Sable knows everything about wounds," she said, with the specific authority of a child who has decided someone is the final word on a subject. "That's what I hear," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "She says anyone can learn," she said. "The knowledge part, the other part is harder." "What other part?" The girl considered. "Being the kind of person who wants to help things," she said. "Not because someone told you to, just because." I looked at the fence rail and thought about that for a long time. Sable had not sent this girl to say this to me. It was simply what the girl had absorbed from being around her, the way children absorb the essential quality of the people they most pay attention to, and then say it aloud without knowing how much they are saying. "She's right," I said. "That part is harder." The girl nodded as though this confirmed something, and went back to watching the birds. On the 16th afternoon, I fixed a problem with the infirmary's brazier. The brazier in the back room, my room, the storeroom, had been drawing badly since the first day, producing more smoke than heat and requiring frequent adjustment. I had been managing it, but on the 16th day I had time and nothing more pressing, and I looked at it properly and found the problem. A crack in the collar where the pipe met the wall fitting, packed over with old clay that had dried and shrunk and was no longer properly sealed. A repair job of 2 hours with the right material, which Vaughan had in the smithy. I did the repair without telling anyone, which was the kind of thing a man does when he is in a place long enough to stop needing to announce his usefulness. Sable found it in the evening when she came to bank the fire in the back room for the night, which was one of the small tasks she did without being asked, and which was one of the things I had learned about her. She kept track of all the small things, not because she was compelled to, but because she could not, because her attention moved naturally toward what needed doing and did not require a formal reason to do it. She stood at the brazier for a moment, noticing the repair. Then she came to the main room where I was on the stool and she said, "The brazier." "The collar was cracked," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You've been cold in there for 16 days, she said. "It was manageable," I said. "You should have said." "You had other things," I said. She was quiet, and the expression on her face was one I had not seen from her before, not quite frustration, not quite something else, a combination of things that I couldn't immediately name. Then she said, "When something needs fixing, you say. That's how things get fixed." "It's fixed now," I said. "It should have been fixed on the first day," she said. "I didn't want to make extra work for you," I said. She looked at me with the direct measuring attention she used when she was deciding what something meant. "Making work for me is not something you need to avoid," she said. "Making unnecessary work, yes. The brazier collar was not unnecessary. Fixing things that are broken is what this place runs on, and there is no version of fixing things that does not involve someone saying the thing needs fixing." I looked at her. "I would have fixed it on the first day if I had known," she said. "I know," I said. A pause. "The rest of the building," she said. "Is there anything else you've been managing without saying?" I thought about it honestly. "The east window shutter doesn't close properly," I said. "It's a latch problem, not a structural one. I've been propping it." She pressed her lips together in a way that was not quite exasperation and not quite amusement. "In the morning," she said, "you'll show me." "In the morning," I said. She went back to banking the fire. I sat on my stool and thought about what had just happened, which was that she had, without drama and without reproach, told me that this was a place where things were fixed rather than managed around, and that I was allowed to say so when something needed fixing, which was a thing that sounded small and was not. On the 16th night, I could not sleep. I lay on the pallet in the now warm back room and listened to the hold settle into its night sounds, and thought about 17 years of being an alpha king. I thought about the first years of it, when I was 22, and had ridden into the king's seat with grief fresh from my father's death, and the weight of the pack new on my shoulders and Myra beside me laughing too loudly in the council chambers, and the sense, in those years, that everything was possible if I paid close enough attention and worked hard enough and cared about the right things. I thought about the years of steady work, the campaigns and the council wars and the boundary negotiations, and the long, careful process of making a pack that was strong enough to handle the things that came, which were never the things you had prepared for but you prepared anyway. And I thought about the years after Myra, which had been the same work done from a different place inside myself, a place that was functional and capable, and that I had not questioned because questioning it required admitting what was absent. And I thought about 19 days in a border settlement in plain clothes, and what I had found here, and what it was I was going back to, and what I was leaving. I had thought when I left Ravenhold that I was coming to a border holding for a survey and a fortnight of anonymity. I had thought the restlessness in my chest was something to manage, like the brazier collar, something to prop and endure and keep functional. She would have told me, if she had known, to say the thing needed fixing. I lay on the pallet in the warm room and thought about that. And I thought about spring. In the months between winter and spring, Ravenhold received me back in the way that a large and well-run hold receives its king after a fortnight's absence, with efficiency and the accumulated weight of the things that had waited. There were meetings and dispatches and the supply allocation to correct, which I did immediately and specifically, and the patrol equipment orders, which I made with the same specificity, and the letter to the trained healer at Ashford about a possible posting to Fenhold, which I drafted carefully and sent before anything else. My counsel noticed the specificity. Edrin noticed it more than anyone. He had known me for 15 years, and he read the quality of attention I was bringing to Fenhold's affairs, and he did not say anything, because he was wise enough to understand that some things are better understood than named. I also read, with considerably more care than I had given them in the previous years, every report that came in from every border holding under my banner. I had Sable's copies of the infirmary records with me, the sections she had prepared, and I read them alongside the official reports from the patrol commanders, and compared what the two accounts said about the same events. The gap between them was instructive. What the patrol commanders reported was tactical and accurate in its way. Troop movements, casualties, recovered materiel. What the infirmary records showed was the texture of those events in the bodies that came back from them, the actual injury patterns, the delays in treatment, the long-term cost of what got managed rather than fixed. I restructured the reporting requirements for the border holdings to include infirmary data, which was a bureaucratic change that would take a season to bed in, but that would mean, in future, that the gap would be smaller. I also wrote a long letter to Torvin about specific concerns I had identified from the records, which was not a letter I would have been able to write before the fortnight in Fenhold. I did not write to Sable. We had not established anything that included letters, and I did not want to establish it before I came back in person, because some things require the presence of the actual people involved and not their correspondence. I came back in the spring, as I had said I would, and found her in the doorway of the infirmary in the spring light, and the thing on her face when she looked up and saw me was exactly what I had hoped it would be and more than I had let myself expect. The summer visit was 2 days, constrained by council matters that could not wait longer. We sat by the fire in the evenings and talked for hours, not about what the spring meant or what the visits meant, not yet, but in the way of two people who have found that they can talk about almost anything, and that the talking produces something neither expected. She told me things about the settlement she had not told me in winter, the particular politics of the elder council, which she navigated with the same patient precision she brought to everything, the way the apprentice healers were developing, which one had the most natural aptitude, and which one compensated for lesser aptitude with the kind of dogged thoroughness that was almost as useful. I told her things about Ravenhold I would not have said to anyone who had not earned the right to hear them, which she had without requiring it. On the second evening, walking back through the east yard after the settlement had gone to bed, she said, "You changed the reporting requirements." "I did," I said. "Torvin told me." A pause. "The infirmary data will be in the quarterly returns now." "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. We walked slowly in the warm summer dark. "That will help a great deal," she said, "for all the border holdings, not just this one." "I know," I said. "I should have done it years ago." "You didn't have the information to know you needed to," she said. "I should have had the information," I said. She looked at me sidelong in the dark. "You're hard on yourself about failures of oversight," she said. "It's appropriate to be," I said. "The failures are real." "Yes," she said, "but you fixed the brazier eventually." I looked at her. The summer dark was soft and warm, and she was walking beside me with her hands in her pockets and her face turned slightly up to catch whatever air was moving. And the analogy she had made, between the brazier collar I had managed and propped for 16 days before she told me to say the thing needed fixing, and the reporting gap I had managed and worked around for years before the fortnight in Fenhold, landed with the particular accuracy of a true thing precisely aimed. "You're right," I said. "I know," she said, without any performance of satisfaction, just the fact of it. We reached the infirmary door. "Come in the autumn," she said, "if you can." "I can," I said. "Then come in the autumn," she said, and went inside. In the autumn I stayed 5 days. In the winter I stayed 12. Each visit was different from the last in the way things are different when two people are learning each other in the real way, which is slowly and with attention, and with the specific adjustments that happen when something you thought you understood turns out to have more rooms than you could see from the outside. She was more complicated than the reports had been able to say, which I had expected. She was also more straightforward than I had imagined a person of her history could be, which I had not expected. The direct quality that I had noticed on the first evening, the way she said what she meant and asked what she needed to know and did not paper the gaps with social courtesy, was not a performance and was not defensive. It was simply how she was. She had been shaped that way by whatever had happened before Morrow Vale, and she had been shaped further by 6 years of a life in which pretense was a waste of resource she could not afford. And what had come out of both of those shaping forces was a person who was among the most honest I had encountered in a life that had exposed me to a great many kinds of people. She was also funnier than she appeared. Not in any performed way, she did not tell jokes, did not play to an audience, but in the dry, precise way of someone who notices the exact right thing about a situation and says it, without preamble, at the exact right moment. I discovered this the third autumn evening, when I was telling her something about the recent border council that had required considerable political management, and she waited until I had finished explaining the specific machination of one of the council members, and then said, "So he said the thing he didn't mean in order to force you to say the thing he meant, so that it would appear to have been your idea," and then looked at me with her level dark eyes and waited. I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "That's exhausting," she said. "It is," I said. How often does that happen? Most council days, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know how you do it, she said, and then, I suppose you don't know how I do it either. I don't, I said. I've watched you do it and I still don't entirely know. What can't you understand about it? The patience, I said. You have a kind of patience I've never seen. She considered this. It's not patience, she said finally. It's just time. Everything takes the time it takes, and trying to make it take less time usually makes it take more. You learn that after a while. I thought about the brazier collar. Or you find the right person to tell you the thing needs fixing, I said. Something crossed her face. Or that, she said. There was a night, in the second winter's visit, when the settlement had a crisis that required everything from everyone. A fire started in the storage building at the east end of Fenhold, not the infirmary building further along, where the dried goods and winter stores were kept. It started in the night, after the hold had gone to bed, from a brazier that had been left poorly banked. I was awake when the alarm went up, which was the particular vigilance of a man who has spent years sleeping with one part of his mind still monitoring the world, and I was outside and helping organize the water brigade before the first of the settlement's men reached the yard. The fire was bad, but it was manageable, which was the difference between a fire in a well-built holding and a fire in a poorly maintained one. The buildings were stone and timber, but the stone was well laid, and the timber properly fireproofed with the old method, and the fire did not jump to neighboring buildings. It burned the east storage hard and lost them perhaps a third of the winter grain stores, which was a serious problem but not a catastrophic one, and it was out within 2 hours. What happened during those 2 hours was the settlement functioning the way a settlement functions when it has been well run. Everyone who needed to do something did it, without needing to be told specifically, because the relationships were clear, and the roles were understood, and the habits were there. Vorn organized the bucket line with the efficiency of a man who has done this before. Torvin's son, Perrin, managed the livestock that needed to be moved away from the building. The patrol veterans handled the containment at the east wall. And Sable was in the infirmary with the door wide open, and every cot prepared, and the fire built up, and the supplies organized before the first person came in with burns. There were 6 burns in total, none of them life-threatening, all of them requiring immediate and skilled treatment. She treated all 6 in the space of an hour and a half, with the specific focused economy of someone who knows exactly what each moment requires and does not spend a single motion on anything that is not that. I held things when she needed things held and stayed out of the way when she didn't need anything, and watched the quality of how she worked. She worked the way certain warriors fight, not with visible effort, but with an efficiency so complete that the effort disappears into the action itself. Each person who came in received exactly what they needed, in the order they needed it, with the specific quality of attention that makes the person receiving it feel that they are the only thing in the room. When the last burn was dressed and the last patient settled with instructions, and the door was finally closed on the cold, and the smoke smell from outside was starting to thin, she sat down on the stool by the fire. She sat there for a moment without moving. I went to the pot she kept on the fire and poured her a cup of the infusion she kept for herself. Not medicine, just the thing she drank in the evenings, something she made herself from dried herbs she grew in the south window, and brought it to her. She took it without looking up, held it in both hands, the warmth of it, I supposed. 6, she said. 6, I said, all of them good, you did well. She was quiet for a moment. The stores, she said. 1/3, I said. It's manageable. I'll send a replacement shipment from Ravenhold. That will take weeks. The settlement can manage weeks. I'll make it as quick as I can. I paused. Lena. She looked up. You did everything right tonight, I said. Everything that could be done, you did it. She looked at the cup in her hands. The stores, she said again. That's not yours, I said. The stores are mine to fix. The people were yours, you fixed them. She was quiet for a long moment. The fire settled. Outside, the settlement was gradually quieting into the ordinary sounds of aftermath, voices, movement, the particular exhausted settling that follows crisis. I know, she said finally. She stopped. What? I said. She looked at the fire. I just needed a moment to be a person who is tired, she said, before I have to go back to being the one people come to. I sat on the other stool. Take the moment, I said. She did. We sat by the fire while the hold settled around us, and she drank her infusion and was, briefly, only a tired woman rather than the person the settlement depended on. And I kept the fire and said nothing and let the moment be what it needed to be. After a while she said, when you're in Ravenhold, do you ever get to be tired? Rarely, I said. Edrin can see when I am. He clears my schedule without telling me why. That's good, she said. Everyone needs someone who does that. Do you have that? I said. She looked at me, then back at the fire. I have a wolf who doesn't move off my foot when I'm trying to get up, she said. Karek under the table opened one eye. That counts, I said. Something at the corner of her mouth, not quite the almost smile. Something quieter than that, and I thought, something rarer, a private amusement shared with someone she was not performing it for. Yes, she said. I suppose it does. There were 3 more visits before the night with the fire and the acknowledgement of the mate mark. One in the early spring after the second winter, a week's visit when the road came clear, and I made the journey south before my council expected me back. One in midsummer, 5 days. And one in the late autumn of the second year, a long visit of 2.5 weeks that overlapped with a difficult stretch of border incidents, and during which I helped, quietly, with the supply chain decisions in a way I could do without revealing what I was to people who still thought I was Aldrich from Ravenhold rather than the Alpha King. Lena did not make a distinction between the two. She treated my capacities as my capacities, whatever their source, and did not diminish them or inflate them based on the title. This was, in the sum of all the visits, the thing I kept returning to. In a life that is arranged around what you are rather than who you are, the experience of being treated as who you are is not common. Myra had done it, in her way. She had been unimpressed by titles generally and by mine specifically, and she had loved me with the same directness she brought to everything. But Myra had come to me already knowing what I was. She had never had the experience of knowing me without the title first. Lena had known Kale from Ashfern for 19 days before she knew Aldrich from Ravenhold. She had formed her understanding of me from the plain clothes and the cracked boots and the way I held a wolf's head and fixed a fence rail and sat on a stool by the fire. And when she learned the title, she did not revise that understanding. She incorporated the title into the person she had already seen, rather than revising the person to fit the title, which is the direction most people go. This meant that in her presence I was, more completely than anywhere else, both things at once. The king and the man, Aldrich and Kale, the one who managed the supply allocations and the one who sat on a stool and ate soup he wasn't asked about and stayed because he couldn't leave. It was not a small thing. I did not treat it as a small thing. The pack at Ravenhold came to know, across the second year, that their king was making regular visits to a border holding that had not previously warranted them. They came to know it the way a pack comes to know things about its alpha king, not because anyone was told directly, but because packs are sensitive to the quality of a king's attention, and where a king's attention goes shapes the texture of the pack's understanding. What they understood was, he goes north. He comes back different in some quality that is not exactly changed but is, the right word was quieter, not diminished, quieter in the way of something that has been settled rather than solved. Edrin understood it most clearly, because Edrin had known me longest. He had watched me in the years since Myra manage the flatness with efficiency and without complaint, and he had known it for what it was and had not pushed. Now he watched me after each visit to Fenhold, and he said nothing, and he continued to say nothing all the way through the autumn of the second year, at which point he said, very briefly and once, "I'm glad," and then went back to his work. That was all he said about it, which was right. Some things are better understood than named, and Edrin had always known the difference. The pack's senior wolves understood it in the way senior wolves understand things, which is not through words, but through the quality of what they feel from their alpha. I am not fully separated from my pack in the way that an ordinary man is separated from other people. There is a thread of connection, not intrusive, not constantly active, but present. And what the pack felt from their king across that second year was a warmth that had been absent for 4 years and was now returning slowly, in the way that warmth returns to a room that has been cold for a long time, gradually from the center outward, and then suddenly everywhere. They did not need to know who she was to feel what she was doing. They would meet her in the spring and know her then. And when they met her and stood in the great yard in the spring morning and looked at the woman from the border holding in the plain gray dress and the practical boots, and old Bren stepped forward and bowed his head in the simple way that is not ceremony but recognition, they would know that what they had been feeling across the second year had been what they knew it was: the return of their king's full presence, the mate bond settling into its place. And Ravenhold would feel in that spring the thing a pack feels when it is whole,